Welcome, everyone, to the Let's Talk Network. Today we are talking college football, and specifically college football realignment. The big news that came down this week was obviously Colorado making the jump to the Big 12, and we're here to talk about that, starting with Colorado. What are you guys' first takes on this?
Yeah, it's kind of a crazy situation, the entire thing. Colorado has struggled quite a bit in the Pac 12, and I'm not sure exactly if they were just looking for a change of scenery or they want a conference that has a little bit more stability currently with the Pac 12 not having a media deal still. But I think we'll have to wait and see how that plays out for them.
Definitely, probably to go back to their original roots because they were a Big 12 member for a really, really long time. And yeah, the stability is just in a different spot. I mean, the Big 12 has a TV deal and the Pac 12 doesn't. That's really what it comes down to right here.
Yeah, Colorado seems like it's just a safer spot for them to be. It gives them a lot more stability, like we all talked about. I agree with everything's been said so far. It's an interesting move, though, because it doesn't really help the Big 12 all that much, in my opinion. I don't see Colorado being a big player when it comes to Big 12 situations. They didn't do well in the Pac-12, but I don't see them doing well in the Big 12. But that could definitely change with Dion being the head coach.
Yeah, I don't know. I do kind of like Colorado's trajectory right now, to be honest with you. I mean, they hit rock bottom last year, 1-11. That's bad. They've brought in Dion. I think they're trending upwards, to be completely honest.
Yeah, I think that this for the Big 12 is probably the move before the move. They had to get someone to move out of the Pac 12 to destabilize them a little bit because I think Arizona was the other rumored one, but they weren't going to be the first one to jump. Colorado was willing to be the first one to jump, which I don't think any of the other 9 were. And so I think for the Big 12, this is very strategic, and this is a really good strategy where maybe Colorado isn't the biggest brand in the Pac-12. They're probably one of the bottom, but that move allows the Big 12 to go after the bigger brands in the Pac-12.
Yeah.
And that just means it's more critical for the Pac-12 if they want to survive to get a media deal in place quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And also getting one of those the four corner states in Colorado. That's the biggest market there. It really kind of bumps up their media presence out west. And it helps them continue to expand that way if they want to, because BYU, Colorado, and it looks like Arizona being rumored could really help them push out west to get more media recognition over there.
Yeah, so what do you think about the Arizona rumor going to the Big 12, Landon?
Man, that would be extremely rough. That would be the end of the Pac in my mind unless major changes happened. The Pac-9, as it stands right now, I don't think that they would be able to survive without adding a new member or multiple new members. I think Arizona, if there's no media deal, nothing, no other teams are added, I think that would be the end for the Pac-12 as we know it.
I think I agree. There's really nothing else the Pac-12 can do, or I guess the Pac-9 at this point, if nothing has changed.
Yeah, I think at least for me personally, I am rooting for the Pac-12 to survive. I think it's important that it does because, obviously none of the other conferences are going to catch up to the Big Ten or the SEC.
Yeah.
No.
But having those teams in different conferences with access to the playoff gives the other 3 the best opportunity to, at least maybe not catch, but at least get closer. That competition allows that, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we need the TCUs, the Cincinnatis, the Oregons, the Washingtons that go into the playoffs and make some noise, Like TCU is one of the only teams outside of the Big Ten and the SEC to win a playoff game.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those things where without these middle-of-the-road Power 5 conferences, the SEC and the Big Ten just become powerhouses to the point where it doesn't even matter. Why is there other conferences?
Yeah.
So I think having the Pac-12 survive is beneficial to the ACC and beneficial to the Big 12. And I think if you're a fan of those conferences, you want to root for that.
Yeah, it may not seem like that right now if you're a Big 12 fan. Obviously you're probably rooting on the death of the Pac-12. But I really don't think that's your best course because as we know in the new playoff, the top 6 conference champions get in automatically.
Mm-hmm.
So if the Pac-12 dissolves, that shrinks that to 4 Power 5s that only get a spot. The Pac-12 getting an extra spot, an Oregon or a Washington, and then the Big 12 also getting a spot for one of their really strong teams gives the teams on the lower tier a much better chance at making waves, at evening out kind of this polarity we have in college football right now.
Yeah, I mean, think about how the rankings work. Since the teams don't all play each other, there's no definitive actual ranking. Some of it is who people believe is better than the other team, strength of schedule. We could have, like, if there is not 5 Power 5 conferences, what if we have 7 SEC teams in the playoff?
Yeah.
Is that something that people want, where a bunch of 2-loss SEC, maybe some 3-loss SEC, all get into the playoff?
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
An automatic big conference takes a spot away from the Alabamas, the Georgias, if they don't win their conference.
Exactly.
It just makes it a better opportunity for these smaller schools to just get a chance.
Yeah.
And we all want that, especially if we're not fans of the SEC or the Big Ten.
Yeah.
If you are, you probably want the demise, but it just makes college football more exciting.
Yeah, I would say definitely if you're a fan of the sport and you want to see a lot of the tradition and the rivalries and people have access to the playoff, you're rooting for the Pac-12 to survive. Mm-hmm. It may feel good in the moment, to root on their demise or to make fun of them. But 5 years down the road, you're going to feel that if they're gone.
Exactly. You saw it with the Big East in basketball. That was a fun conference to watch, and with their demise, it kind of made everything a little less. It made everything a little bit more gloomy. It wasn't as fun.
Yeah.
So don't want that with football.
I think we all agree the Big 12 is in a really strong position right now.
Yeah. They've been aggressive.
Yeah, they've
been very aggressive in a time where people are changing conferences. Perfect.
Yeah.
It's fun to see.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, and so right now we're going to move on to some ideas that we think maybe could save the Pac-12 to be able to keep them alive, and keep them as a viable Power 5 conference, and just some realignment ideas that we thought of. Some are pretty realistic. Some are a little more off the wall than we've thought of, but we're excited to show them to you.
It's going to be fun.
Yeah. So here we go. We will start with the first one. This is probably the most, I would say, likely one. Yeah. Probably the simplest one to understand is San Diego State just slides into Colorado's slot in the Pac-12.
Just replace it and go Pac-10.
Yeah. I think this is the most likely because I think there's a real kind of elitist attitude with the Pac-12 presidents. They don't want to bring in anyone that isn't on the West Coast. They don't want to bring in anyone whose academics aren't up to snuff. And I mean, that's hurt them in the past. And so I really think that this is probably the most likely, but I would encourage them to kind of open their mind and, be open to teams that they would not have traditionally considered.
I completely agree with that. I think that's something that the Pac in general, why they've struggled with this realignment and losing teams is because of that attitude in a lot of ways, I think.
I agree.
Where it's like, it's good, hold those traditions, be proud of your conference. But at the same time, you can't just stagnate and expect other conferences not to make a move.
Exactly.
And I think San Diego State's like a perfect ad, especially just to start us off small. They've made a lot of improvements with their facilities. They've made a lot of improvements when it comes to their athletics. You see, they were just in the national championship game in basketball. They've made some noise playing against some of these Pac teams in the previous few years. I think they're a good ad for the Pac-12, or I guess the Pac-10 in this scenario, to stay alive. And I think it would benefit them, San Diego State, a lot. Giving them a chance, they could be really powerful, really fun to watch in the next few years.
Yeah. So that is one scenario in which we see the Pac-10 at this point surviving. The next scenario is a little bit more bold and probably what I would go for if I was the Pac-12, which is staying at the Pac-12. You would add SMU, San Diego State, and Tulane. I think those are three of the best available G5s. SMU, obviously, massive donor base in Texas, good recruiting area. Tulane, obviously, beat USC in the, was it Cotton Bowl last year? I think it was Cotton Bowl. And San Diego State, we've talked about them. To me, the Pac-12 needs a few more teams so they can have enough games, and so everyone doesn't have to play everyone every single year. This is what I would do.
And we talked about SMU with their big boosters. That Dallas market is huge for the Pac-12 to get. Tulane, it's an interesting thing because Tulane, it kind of seems like they slide in there because of that win versus USC, but they've made a lot of noise. This green wave has kind of flooded a lot of other people's minds other than just the Pac-12. And so it's really kind of fun to see these expansions that could happen and I agree with Tanner, if there's any other programs to add, I think SMU, San Diego State, and Tulane are the group to make it to Pac-12, keeps them prominent, and it's a good conference. I like what I see.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. It's like the Pac-12 needs to expand, and it's not like we're going to be poaching Ohio State from the Big Ten. It's like, or even poaching any teams from the Big Ten, SEC, or Big 12. It just, that doesn't really make a lot of sense.
It doesn't really, it doesn't happen.
Like something like that happening just seems extremely unlikely at this point. And so I think you need to look for teams that are already on an upwards trajectory, and with that Power 5 level boost could actually reach a pretty high ceiling as a program. And so people like SMU, SDSU, Tulane, I feel like those are great programs to say, okay, let's get them in the conference on a steal a little bit,
Yeah.
And then let's build where they are with that Power 5 resources. Let's build up these programs and let's see what they can be.
Yeah, SMU particularly is the one that I could see benefiting most from the Power 5 jump. As we mentioned, massive donor base. Their NIL programs are really exceptional. The best G5 NIL programs, certainly. And they would be really strong in the Power 5 as well. So I think given a chance, they could really thrive.
Mm-hmm.
Just talking a little bit more about Tulane as well. They remind me a lot of like what Utah was before they made it into the Pac-12. They were a Group of 5 team that made it to a New York 6 bowl. It wasn't New York 6 at the time for Utah, but New York 6 here, and beating a team that they had no business beating. Utah going in playing Pitt and playing Alabama, beating those teams, going undefeated for those seasons, really made them the big choice to jump up from Group of 5 to Power 5. Tulane kind of has that same vibe. Obviously, they didn't go undefeated, but going into the Cotton Bowl, beating USC, that is a big, big, big statement. And I'm sure a lot of the Pac-12 fans appreciated them doing that for them.
Yeah.
And so they come in and they kind of, hey, thank you.
Yeah. This next scenario is definitely the least likely of them. They add all the teams we've talked about, but then also add Colorado State and Boise State. These schools are probably not the sexiest schools you could add, obviously. Well, none of them are going to be when you're adding from the G5 ranks rather than the Power 5 ranks. But Boise State, I really feel like they deserve this. Their football program has been consistently great for a very long time. I think they have good fan support, and I think they would be a really great add to the Pac-12.
Mm-hmm.
And who doesn't want to go up to Boise and play on the blue turf?
Yeah.
That's cool.
It's a fun thing to watch. The only thing that really holds them back is the academics. But athletics with the football program has been very good for a very long time. I think it's time. I agree.
Yeah, one of the reasons I like the Pac-14 approach as well is if you think about it in a playoff spot type of way, these top teams, as the SEC does, will very often be able to avoid playing each other in the regular season, which will then put the Pac in a more national setting in that playoff more often. And then in addition to that, it's like, panning for gold. You want as much sand as you can. Get as many teams in here. Yeah. Maybe one of them really shines at the Power 5 level within a few years. Say, okay, that's a great ad. So I like this too.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that Colorado State hopefully you can replace most of what Colorado brought. Probably not as big of a fan base, but still probably a very similar competitiveness as far as football and athletics go. I think they would be a good ad. They would get us to 14. And yeah, I think that would be a good-looking conference overall.
Yeah. And I think talking a little bit more about this, I feel like it's one of those things where routinely the Pac-12 is in the past have kind of hurt themselves with the 12 teams, everyone playing against each other, 10 conference games instead of the normal 9 that I think
9 conference games
instead of
8.
8. Sorry,
yeah.
that mixed that up. Other conferences do. It hurt them. It hurt USC. It hurt Oregon. It hurt Washington, and it makes those programs playing other great programs when they're up high to fall because there's a better chance to lose to them. So adding these teams, especially in the beginning, could help them in the especially in the beginning. But in the long run, it could definitely bump up these other programs.
Especially with the 12-team playoff, the goal of each conference should be able to get as many people in as possible. Mm-hmm. And like Landon said, this allows them to do that. This allows them to have more teams with 0 losses, 1 loss, 2 loss. Because when you expand the conference, the teams overlap less, which means that there's more potential for teams to have better records. So I think that would be
what these other conferences are doing as well.
Yeah.
People like the Big 12, even the SEC adding, the Big 10 adding. They're expanding their conference, so everyone doesn't have to play everyone.
Yeah. Like, how often do you see a Georgia-Alabama regular season game? It's almost never.
Once in my lifetime.
Like 40 years ago or something.
It's been a while.
Like three times ever.
But yeah, it's been a while. And so, yeah, that's why this is a good idea, I think, for the Pac-12. So next option is a bit more nuclear, I would say.
Yeah.
Just a little bit.
This is going to be called the Coastal Conference.
Don't be alarmed.
This is a merging of the ACC and the Pac-12. And this scenario was brought about by the Big Ten and the SEC. Oh, sorry. This trend is brought about by the Big Ten and the SEC poaching teams from the ACC, kind of throwing them into a tailspin as they have done the Big 12 and the Pac-12. So the teams poached in this scenario would be Florida State and Clemson to the SEC, and Miami and Virginia Tech to the Big Ten. And so kind of going along the remaining teams, we kind of split them up into a Coastal North and a Coastal South division for kind of equity in terms of football and in terms of basketball in this conference. The Coastal North would be Cal, Virginia, Washington State, Oregon, Stanford, Washington, Boston College, Syracuse, Pitt, and Oregon State. The Coastal South would be Arizona, North Carolina State, Louisville, UNC, Utah, Duke, Georgia Tech, Arizona State, San Diego State, and Wake Forest. I think that if that poaching does take place, this would be an attractive option for both conferences. The ACC is known to be unhappy with its media deal. The Pac-12 doesn't have a media deal. And so them dissolving their conferences and forming a new conference could be in the best interest of both parties.
I mean, this allows both parties to survive. Because if in the scenario where the SEC says, hey, I want Clemson, I want Florida State, Big 12, I want Big 10, I want Miami, it destroys the ACC.
Yeah.
And it makes the most sense for the two coastal conferences to merge together and just make a fun East-West Coast type of vibe. And we can't really talk about ACC without bringing up basketball, because without Clemson, without Florida State, football does kind of diminish. But we see a lot of upside with North Carolina. Virginia can always be pretty good. Pitt's been decent, and so has Wake Forest. Georgia Tech has a history. When we talk about basketball, that's the place you want to be. And this will really strengthen both sides. Oregon has recruited very well in basketball. So has Washington. Arizona's routinely been great. Then you throw in Duke, North Carolina, Louisville, Syracuse,
Wake Forest.
Watch out.
Virginia.
It'd be such a fun conference to look and watch. And imagine teams going and forming rivalries. You don't see an Oregon-Duke game ever. Oregon coming in and going to Duke and playing in that incredible hostile environment. That would be fun to watch. Same thing with football. North Carolina coming and playing in Oregon, just like we had in that bowl game this year. It was a fun game. Imagine that every single year. That would be unbeatable.
A reason why I love this idea is because even with talent being poached, there's been Pac-12 talent poached. If the ACC do lose those top tier teams, separate those conferences, a bit depleted seem pretty weak, but together they make a really strong, healthy conference.
Yeah.
Completely.
Yeah, and ideally, like we mentioned before, it's better for 5 power conferences to exist to get those automatic qualifier spots. But this would be the option where neither conference really sees a path to survival without the other, and so they merge together.
And another thing with this is, like, you don't want to, I don't know if dilute is the right word, you don't want to bring too many group of 5 teams into Power 5, because we're getting to a point where the SEC and Big Ten are getting so far ahead. If we just keep adding group of 5s to these other Power 5 conferences, I just don't know if that's sustainable. To me, that's the beginning of a Power 2, which is something that I think would be good for college football to avoid.
So this might be the way to, only add one G5 team in San Diego State here and then merge 19 Power 5 teams together. Because if the Pac-12 does end up collapsing, there could be some really strong Power 5 teams that are left on the wayside. And that's just not good for the sport.
It's not good for college football or college basketball, whatever sport. It's just not good for the sport to have quality teams left out of the most competitive levels of football. Yeah, so this is a result where that doesn't happen, where that is able to be avoided.
You see where there's been rumors all over that the Pac-12 dissolves, or I guess, again, the Pac-9 at this point. Oregon, Stanford, Washington, Cal get the invite to the Big Ten, and it leaves teams like Arizona
Well, Utah, Arizona State would probably go to the Big 12 in that scenario. But then it would leave
Oregon,
Oregon State, and Washington State out in the cold, which just I don't think is good for the competitive balance. Oregon State and Washington State have proven their Power 5 teams,
Yes.
so I think they deserve to be there.
I agree with you completely. It would honestly crush me just as a football fan to see an Oregon State or Washington State left out of the Power 5 ranks.
Yeah.
And
That's not good for the sport. They have great fan bases, especially Oregon State, passionate fans. They have a program that people care about. They have good teams. They're competitive. They play good football. It's just not good to have them left out. And like, obviously, they're going to win every year in a group of 5 until eventually their recruiting will probably drop off as people lose
and
interest.
then they'll fade into the pack. Yeah,
which is horrible.
It's just one of those things where for the first 5 years of that scenario, no group of 5 would want to add them. They're gonna get.
It's a guaranteed win.
They're gonna get pushed over. It's not good for anybody, and so that's something we want to avoid, and this helps that.
Yeah. So our next scenario is very similar, but it's a little bit deeper cuts. So in this scenario, we envision maybe Arizona joining Colorado and jumping ship to the Big 12, and then the Big 10 also takes UNC and who else did they take in this scenario?
Wow, Georgia Tech goes to
Georgia
the
Tech
SEC.
goes to the SEC and UNC goes to the Big 10. Or maybe Georgia Tech to the Big 10 as well, potentially. But yeah, that's this scenario where 2 extra teams get taken from the ACC and Arizona jump ship to the Big 12. And so we have a similar thing where we have the Coastal North and the Coastal South, but just without a few of those teams. I think this would be a really strong conference. 16 teams, or let's see, the 18 teams, I think.
Yes.
Which is, it's what conference sizes are going to. I think in the next few years we'll probably see the first conferences with 20 teams. And so I don't think 18 is really too much.
This is 16, sorry.
Yeah, 16 teams in this conference. So yeah, I think this is a really strong conference, similar to the one we did before.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, again, we talked about the diluting of adding group of 5s. If this avoids that, as much as we've praised the San Diego States, the SMUs, the Tulanes, they are going to be group of 5s, and it's going to be a hard transition into Power 5. That's probably the biggest knock that the Big 12 has had when adding these 5 group of 5 teams. These group of 5 teams were probably the best in the bunch, and they can definitely make that jump. But this just avoids that scenario. It's just getting 16 already proven Power 5 programs together and creating a massive, pretty powerful conference in my eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So thank you guys for listening to this episode. These were some of our realignment ideas. Please comment if you have any other ideas we should consider. This is an interesting topic to talk about, and hopefully it's resolved soon so we can start talking about what actually matters, the football games that are coming on the field. So thank you guys very much, and we will see you next time.